What happens when privilege meets prejudice on a dusty construction site? When Olivia Carter, a successful 34-year-old real estate developer, laughed at who she thought was just another construction worker, she had no idea she was mocking Daniel Whitaker, the brilliant chief architect behind her company's most ambitious project. But this isn't just another story about embarrassment or comeuppance. It's a transformative journey that challenges our deepest assumptions about success, dignity, and the facades we build around our own prejudices. As Olivia's perfectly constructed world of privilege begins to crack, she discovers that the true architecture of change isn't in the buildings we raise, but in the barriers we break down. Through unexpected twists and profound revelations, this story weaves together themes of redemption, professional excellence, and the courage to confront our own biases. Watch as one moment of prejudice transforms into a powerful partnership that will change not just two lives, but an entire industry's approach to community, heritage, and human dignity. Olivia Carter's Louboutin heels clicked sharply against the concrete as she strode through the construction site, her designer suit a stark contrast to the dusty environment. At 34, she had already made her mark as one of Boston's most ruthless real estate developers, known for transforming historic neighborhoods into luxury developments. The morning sun caught her perfectly styled blonde hair as she checked her watch. Another inspection of her latest project, the controversial Highland Tower development. The site was alive with activity, workers in hard hats maneuvering equipment, the rhythmic pounding of hammers, and the low rumble of heavy machinery. Olivia wrinkled her nose at the construction dust settling on her expensive blazer. Her eyes swept critically over the workers, most of whom had learned to make themselves scarce when she visited. That's when she noticed him. A tall, muscular black man in his late 40s, wearing work-worn jeans and a safety vest, carefully examining the foundation plans. His salt and pepper hair was visible beneath his hard hat, and his hands were calloused from what she assumed was years of manual labor. What caught her attention wasn't his appearance, but rather the authoritative way he was pointing at the blueprints, directing other workers. "Excuse me," Olivia called out, her voice carrying that particular tone of condescension reserved for those she considered beneath her. "Who authorized you to handle those plans? Those are confidential documents." Daniel Whitaker looked up, his warm brown eyes crinkling slightly at the corners as he regarded the approaching woman. 47 years of life had taught him to read people quickly, and everything about her demeanor screamed privilege and prejudice. "Ma'am, I assure you I'm qualified to," he began, his deep voice carrying a gentle southern lilt. "I don't care what you think you're qualified for," Olivia cut him off, gesturing dismissively. "Those plans need to be handled by someone with proper architectural training. Where's your supervisor?" The construction site fell silent as workers stopped to watch the unfolding scene. Olivia's voice had carried across the site, and her disdain was palpable. Daniel straightened to his full height, 6 feet 2 inches of dignity and composure, but said nothing. His silence seemed to fuel Olivia's misplaced authority. "I mean, really," she continued, turning to address the gathering crowd with a laugh that dripped with mockery. "What's next? Should I expect a janitor to start designing our multi-million-dollar penthouses?" Her perfectly manicured hand gesturing toward Daniel, as if he were a prime example of absurdity. Several workers shifted uncomfortably, exchanging knowing glances. Lucas Reyes, a young carpenter, stepped forward. "Mrs. Carter, I think you should." "No, let me handle this," Daniel interrupted softly, placing a gentle hand on Lucas's shoulder. His calm demeanor was a stark contrast to the tension in the air. He'd faced this kind of prejudice before, and experience had taught him that dignity was the strongest response. Olivia wasn't finished. Her voice grew louder, her blonde hair catching the morning sun as she shook her head in exasperation. "This is exactly what's wrong with construction sites these days. No proper supervision, workers overstepping their bounds." She pulled out her phone, manicured fingers flying over the screen. "I'm calling the project manager right now. This is completely unacceptable." Daniel watched her with a mixture of patience and something that looked almost like pity. Around them, the workers had formed a loose circle, many with their heads bowed in second-hand embarrassment. They knew what was coming. "You know what's truly unacceptable, Miss Bennett?" Daniel finally spoke, his voice carrying across the now silent construction site, prejudice masquerading as professional concern. Olivia's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. "Excuse me? How dare you accuse me of—" "I wasn't finished," Daniel continued. His tone remained measured but firm. "You walked onto this site, took one look at me, and made assumptions based solely on my appearance and the color of my skin. You didn't ask for my credentials, my role, or my experience. You simply decided that someone who looked like me couldn't possibly be qualified to handle architectural plans." The following morning, Olivia strode confidently into the Highland Development Group's boardroom, her presentation ready for the quarterly project review. The room was filled with familiar faces, board members she'd worked with for years, investors who trusted her judgment, and her immediate superior, Thomas Sinclair. "Before we begin," Thomas announced, standing at the head of the table, "I'd like to introduce someone who will be taking a more active role in overseeing the Highland Tower project. Many of you already know him. Daniel Whitaker, our chief architect and head of design innovation." Olivia's world tilted on its axis as Daniel walked into the boardroom, impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit. Gone were the work boots and safety vest, replaced by Italian leather shoes and a silk tie. But his eyes, those same warm, knowing eyes, held her gaze steadily across the conference table. "Daniel has been conducting his quarterly on-site review this week," Thomas continued, oblivious to Olivia's mounting horror. "As you know, it's his signature philosophy to work alongside our construction teams, understanding the practical challenges of his designs firsthand. It's one of the reasons our projects have such exceptional build quality." The blood drained from Olivia's face as memories of yesterday's confrontation played through her mind in excruciating detail. Each mocking word, every condescending gesture, now reflected back at her with devastating clarity. Her hands trembled slightly as she realized the full magnitude of her mistake. Daniel began his presentation, displaying an intricate understanding of architectural principles that made Olivia's earlier assumptions seem even more ridiculous. His designs were revolutionary, incorporating sustainable materials, community spaces, and aesthetic elements that honored the neighborhood's history while pushing boundaries of modern architecture. Olivia sat alone in her penthouse that evening, a glass of untouched wine on the marble countertop before her. The city lights twinkled beyond her floor-to-ceiling windows, but she couldn't appreciate the view. Her mind was trapped in a spiral of self-reflection, forcing her to confront uncomfortable truths about herself. Growing up in Connecticut's wealthy suburbs, Olivia had been surrounded by privilege her entire life. Her father, a successful hedge fund manager, and her mother, a social queen bee, had carefully curated their daughter's world. Their circle was exclusively white, exclusively wealthy, and explicitly prejudiced, though they preferred terms like traditional and selective. She remembered the subtle lessons learned at dinner parties, the whispered comments about those people moving into certain neighborhoods, the praised value of heritage that somehow always meant white European heritage, the warnings about maintaining community standards. These beliefs had been served alongside crystal glasses of champagne and imported caviar, making them seem as refined and natural as the air they breathed. Her education at elite private schools had done little to challenge these ingrained biases. Even at Yale, where diversity was supposedly celebrated, Olivia had gravitated toward people who reflected her privileged worldview. Her summer internships, orchestrated through her father's connections, had placed her in environments where success looked exactly like her, white, wealthy, and well-connected. As she sat in her kitwang, Olivia forced herself to examine her professional rise. How many times had she dismissed people based on appearances? How many potentially valuable perspectives had she ignored? The memory of Daniel's dignified response to her behavior made her cheeks burn with shame. Daniel Whitaker sat in his home office, surrounded by architectural awards and framed degrees from MIT. His fingers traced over an old photograph of his father, a construction worker who'd spent 40 years building other people's dreams. The incident with Olivia had stirred memories he usually kept carefully filed away. Growing up in South Atlanta, Daniel had learned about architecture from the ground up, literally. His father would sneak him onto construction sites on weekends, teaching him how buildings came together, piece by piece. "Son," he'd say, "to design something great you need to understand how it's built." At 17, Daniel had earned a full scholarship to MIT. The transition from his predominantly black neighborhood to the prestigious halls of academia had been jarring. He was often the only black face in his advanced architecture classes, and the subtle skepticism from professors and classmates wore on him like water on stone, constant and eroding. "You have a really fascinating perspective on urban development," one professor had said, surprise evident in his tone, very street level. The compliment carried the weight of assumption, the suggestion that Daniel's insight came from some inherent understanding of lower class living rather than his intensive study and natural talent. But Daniel had turned these challenges into fuel. He graduated summa cum laude, earned his master's, and began his career with the determination to change the industry from within. His philosophy of hands-on leadership wasn't just about better architecture. It was about breaking down the barriers between design and construction, between those who planned and those who built. The atmosphere at Highland Development Group had grown thick with tension. News of Olivia's confrontation with Daniel spread through the office like wildfire, whispered in break rooms, and discussed in hushed tones during lunch breaks. Her reputation, once sterling, now carried a tarnish that no amount of professional success could immediately polish away. Board members, who had once praised her cutthroat efficiency, now viewed her with careful reservation. The incident highlighted concerns about the company's image, in an era where diversity and inclusion weren't just buzzwords but business imperatives. Several potential clients had already expressed hesitation about working with her. Thomas Sinclair called her into his office late one afternoon. "Olivia, we need to discuss damage control," he began, his usual jovial manner replaced by corporate seriousness. "Daniel is not just our chief architect. He's one of our most valuable assets. His innovative approach to community-integrated design has won us contracts we wouldn't have dreamed of touching 5 years ago." Olivia sat rigid in her chair as Thomas outlined the consequences. Mandatory sensitivity training, a temporary suspension from client-facing roles, and most significantly, direct oversight from Daniel on her next project. The Highland Tower development, her crown jewel, would now require his approval at every stage. The first project meeting with Daniel was scheduled in the small conference room, away from curious eyes. Olivia arrived early, her usual confidence replaced by an uncomfortable awareness of her every gesture. Daniel entered precisely on time, carrying a stack of revised blueprints. "The current design lacks community integration," he began without preamble, spreading the plans across the table. "We're building in a historic neighborhood, Ms. Carter. These people have lived here for generations. We can't just drop a glass tower in their midst and expect gratitude." Bera found herself drawn into the technical discussion, despite her initial resistance. Daniel's vision was compelling. He wanted to preserve the neighborhood's character while creating something modern and sustainable. His designs incorporated local architectural elements, created public spaces that would serve both new residents and the existing community. About the profit margins, Olivia started to object. "We'll increase," Daniel interrupted, "when we create something the community embraces rather than resents. Look at these statistics from our previous community-integrated projects." As weeks passed, their interactions evolved from stiffly professional to cautiously collaborative. Olivia began to notice things about Daniel she'd been too blinded by prejudice to see before. His brilliant problem-solving skills, his easy rapport with everyone from construction workers to executive board members, the way he could transform complex architectural concepts into simple, compelling narratives. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It came in small moments, like when Olivia found herself defending Daniel's design choices in a meeting with skeptical investors. The integration of community spaces isn't just socially responsible, she heard herself saying. It's financially sound. Let me show you the projected engagement metrics. Daniel noticed these changes, but never commented directly. Instead, he began including her in site visits, teaching her to read the project from different angles. "Architecture isn't just about the building," he explained one day, standing amidst the construction. "It's about the lives that will inhabit these spaces. Every design choice we make affects someone's daily experience." One particularly meaningful moment came when Olivia accompanied Daniel to a community meeting. She watched as he presented their revised plans to local residents, many of whom had initially opposed the development. His respect for their concerns, his genuine interest in their input, and his ability to incorporate their suggestions into the design won over even the strongest critics. "You've learned to listen," Daniel observed quietly as they left the meeting. "That's the first step to truly seeing." The comment struck Olivia deeply, making her realize how far she'd come from that first confrontation on the construction site. The discovery hit Olivia like a thunderbolt. Buried in the Highland Tower project's historical documentation was evidence that the development site had once been home to one of Boston's first black-owned businesses districts in the 1920s. The buildings slated for demolition weren't just old structures. They were landmarks of cultural heritage. She sat in her office past midnight. Photographs of the original buildings spread across her desk. The architecture, though weathered, told stories of entrepreneurship, community, and resistance against segregation. These were exactly the kinds of buildings she'd spent her career demolishing without a second thought. Olivia's finger hovered over her phone, Daniel's number on the screen. The discovery would delay the project significantly, potentially costing millions. The old Olivia would have buried the information, prioritizing profit over preservation. But she wasn't that person anymore. The weight of every dismissive comment she'd ever made about revitalizing neighborhoods pressed down on her conscience. How many other histories had she erased in her quest for profit? How many communities had she displaced with her glass towers and luxury condos? The board meeting was tense. Olivia stood before the projected images of the historic district, conscious of the heavy silence in the room. "We need to completely redesign the project," she announced, her voice firm despite her racing heart. "Absolutely not." Jonathan Caldwell, the project's primary investor, cut in. "We've already sunk millions into the current design. The demolition contracts are signed. Then we'll pay the penalties," Olivia responded, surprising herself with her conviction. "This isn't just about buildings. It's about acknowledging and preserving Black history in Boston. Our current design would erase that completely." The room erupted in overlapping objections. Olivia caught Daniel watching her, his expression unreadable. She continued, her voice rising above the chaos. "I've prepared an alternative proposal. We can integrate the historic structures into our design, create a heritage walking trail, include community spaces that celebrate the area's history, culture, and culture differences in working styles." Upon hearing this, Carter checked to make sure Melanie would support what she'd found attractive in his approach. "Miss Carter," Jonathan interrupted, "if you continue pushing this absurd idea, you'll find yourself looking for another position." Olivia straightened her spine, thinking of all the times she'd been the one making similar threats. "Then I'll resign. But first I'm going public with this information. I wonder how potential buyers will feel about purchasing condos built on demolished Black history," she added quietly. As the redesign of Highland Tower became a catalyst for change in Boston's development community, Olivia and Daniel's collaboration turned into a case study of how modern development could honor history while embracing the future. They worked with local historians and community leaders to document the stories of the original business district. The redesign project incorporated the restored facades of historic buildings into the new structure, creating a seamless blend of old and new. The ground floor was transformed into a museum and community space, celebrating Black entrepreneurship in Boston. Local media picked up the story, but not in the way Olivia had initially feared. Historic preservation meets modern vision. How one development project is changing the face of urban planning, read the Boston Globe headline. The article featured interviews with descendants of the original business owners, many of whom had feared their family histories would be lost forever. Daniel and Olivia found themselves speaking at community meetings, architectural conferences, and urban planning seminars. Their message was simple but powerful. Development doesn't have to mean destruction. "We're not just building structures," Olivia would say, echoing Daniel's earlier words. "We're building bridges between past and future." The success of the Highland Tower redesign transformed Olivia's approach to development. She began requiring historical impact studies for all her projects, not just as a formality, but as a fundamental part of the design process. Her team, once known for aggressive development tactics, became leaders in community-integrated architecture. Daniel's influence extended beyond the technical aspects of design. Olivia found herself adopting his practice of regular site visits, engaging with construction workers, and seeking input from community members. She learned that true leadership wasn't about asserting authority, but about fostering collaboration. Their working relationship became a model for the company. The woman who had once laughed at a black man on a construction site now fiercely advocated for diverse perspectives in every aspect of development. When younger employees asked about her transformation, Olivia was brutally honest about her past prejudices and the journey to overcome them. Success in architecture, she told a group of interns, isn't just about designing beautiful buildings. It's about understanding the human story behind every brick we lay and every wall we raise. And those stories come in all colors, from all backgrounds. Olivia's transformation extended far beyond her professional life. One Sunday afternoon, she found herself at her parents' country club in Connecticut, surrounded by the familiar trappings of privilege that had shaped her worldview for so long. "Darling, we heard about your unique approach to the Highland Project," her mother said over brunch, pearl necklace gleaming. "Your father and I are concerned you're letting sentiment cloud your business judgment." Olivia set down her mimosa, studying the familiar faces around her. These were the people who had taught her to view the world through a lens of privilege and prejudice. "Actually, Mom, our innovative approach has increased property values by 40% while preserving community heritage. But that's not even the point." She spoke about Daniel, about learning to see beyond surface judgments, about the richness that diversity brought to both design and life. Her parents exchanged uncomfortable glances as she challenged every prejudiced assumption they'd ever instilled in her. "The world is changing," she concluded. "And thank God for that, because the world you taught me to see was too small, too limited, and, ultimately, too wrong." The Highland Tower opening ceremony was unlike any in Boston's development history. Instead of the typical champagne reception for wealthy investors, the celebration began with the Community Street Festival. Food trucks representing local businesses lined the streets, and the restored historic facades glowed with carefully placed lighting. Daniel and Olivia stood together on the makeshift stage. Their journey, from that first confrontation to this moment, reflected in their easy companionship. The project had become something neither of them had initially imagined, a testament to what was possible when prejudice gave way to partnership. "This building," Daniel addressed the crowd, "stands as proof that progress doesn't require erasure. Every beam, every brick, represents a collaboration between past and present, between different communities and perspectives." The story of Olivia's transformation and the Highland Tower project became a case study in architectural journals and business schools. "From prejudice to partnership, transforming urban development," read the Harvard Business Review headline. Media coverage focused not just on the architectural innovation, but on the human story behind it. Olivia spoke openly about her initial prejudices and the journey to overcome them. Her candor about her past mistakes and commitment to change resonated with many who recognized their own biases. Daniel, too, gained recognition, not just for his architectural brilliance, but for his role in transforming corporate culture. "True change," he often said in interviews, "requires both the courage to confront bias and the courage to confront bias and the grace to allow transformation." 1 year after Highland Tower's completion, Sari stood in Daniel's office discussing their newest initiative, the Whitaker Carter Fellowship for Community-Centered Architecture. The program would provide opportunities for minority students to gain hands-on experience in both design and construction, breaking down the very barriers that had once fueled Olivia's prejudices. "You know," Daniel said, reviewing the fellowship documents, "that day on the construction site, I saw something in your laugh that you didn't see yourself. Fear. Fear of being wrong about everything you thought you knew." Olivia nodded, remembering her past self with a mixture of shame and gratitude for how far she'd come. "I thank God every day that you saw beyond my ignorance." The room was interrupted as the sun set over Boston's skyline, casting long shadows through the historic facades of Highland Tower. Olivia reflected on her journey. The woman who had laughed at a black construction worker was gone, replaced by someone who understood that true architecture, like true character, was built from the foundation up. Daniel caught her eye across the room and smiled, both of them knowing that their story had become something larger than themselves, a blueprint for transformation that would continue to shape both buildings and beliefs for generations to come. The Highland Tower stood as their legacy, not just as a building, but as a monument to the possibility of change, a testament to the power of seeing beyond surface appearances, to the heart of what makes both architecture and humanity beautiful. 5 years after the Highland Tower completion, Olivia sat in the front row of MIT's architecture auditorium, watching Daniel deliver the commencement speech to a graduating class that reflected the change they'd helped create. The Whitaker Carter Fellowship had grown beyond their initial vision, now partnering with 20 major universities across the country. The audience included faces from every background, a mosaic of talent that the industry had too long overlooked. Among them sat Sofia Delgado, their first fellowship recipient, now heading her own sustainable development firm. Behind her, Ethan Wong, another fellowship graduate, who'd recently won an international award for his innovative community-centered designs. Olivia's eyes drifted to the scale model of Highland Tower, displayed prominently in the lobby. What once had been a symbol of her prejudice had become a beacon of possibility. The project had sparked a movement in urban development, with cities across the country now requiring heritage impact studies and community integration plans for major developments. Daniel's voice carried across the auditorium. Architecture is more than designing spaces. It's about building bridges between people, between past and present, between what is and what could be. Every blueprint is a chance to right historical wrongs, to heal community wounds, to create spaces that celebrate our differences while highlighting our shared humanity. Olivia felt tears welling up as he continued. 5 years ago, a moment of prejudice became a catalyst for change. Today, that change ripples through every design we create, every space we build, every life we touch through our work. The ceremony concluded with the announcement of a new initiative, the Highland Heritage Grant, providing funding for preserving and celebrating diverse architectural histories in urban development. As Olivia watched Daniel hand out diplomas, she realized their story had become something bigger than both of them. It had become a foundation upon which future generations would build their dreams. This story isn't just about architecture or prejudice. It's about the transformative power of acknowledging our biases and having the courage to change. In a world where snap judgments and unconscious bias continue to shape opportunities and outcomes, we must ask ourselves, what assumptions do we make about others based on appearance? What voices are we failing to see? Change begins with recognition, grows through action, and flourishes through commitment. Like Olivia and Daniel, we all have the power to transform moments of prejudice into opportunities for growth and understanding. If this story touched your heart, take action. Share it with someone who needs to hear its message. Subscribe to our channel for more transformative stories that challenge perspectives and inspire change. Hit the like button to help this message reach a wider audience. Leave a comment sharing your own experience with prejudice and transformation. Remember, real change happens when we move beyond simply acknowledging our biases to actively working to overcome them. Together, we can build a world where talent and character matter more than appearance. Together, we can build a world where talent and character matter more than appearance or background.